Good morning. My name is Anthony Mintenko, and on behalf of the Horticulture School Planning Committee, I would like to welcome you to the second of two webinars on high tunnels in Manitoba for our 2025 spring webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled High Tunnel Production and Operation, is presented by Tom Gonzalez and myself. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Tom or myself during the presentation, please enter them into the chat feature on your screen and we'll be able to answer your questions at the end of the webinar. Tom will be presenting the first portion of the webinar. And I'll just give a brief intro for Tom. Tom Gonzalez is the provincial vegetable crop specialist with Manitoba Agriculture based in Carman and has been with the department since 2005. Tom has experience with working with both vegetable and potato industries in various capacities over the past 40 plus years. He works with Manitoba vegetable producers and industry on improving vegetable production via extension and research projects aimed at increasing the yield and quality of vegetable crops grown in the province. Tom was nominated for the Manitoba Government's Service Excellent Team Award and is a lead for the horticulture school events such as this webinar series and in-person field days and meetings. Take it away, Tom.
Well, thanks, Anthony. So, as Anthony was saying, today we're going to be discussing high tunnel preparation, operation, and crop production. And what we'll what I'll go over is high tunnel operation and preparation. Then I'll talk a bit about production, and I'll do a summary. Then Anthony is going to talk a bit about fruit production, and we'll take some questions. So, to start off for preparation for planting in your tunnel, you're going to have to do some soil sampling, and we do soil sampling at three depths: 0 to 6 inches, 6 to 12, and 12 to 24. For a commercial producer, you could probably get away with one depth, maybe 0 to 12. You get more information, obviously, and arguably some better results if you do different depths like we did. But for a commercial producer to save some costs, 0 to 12 inches would probably be fine. So you submit those samples. There's a number of labs they can go to. I have an AgVise sheet up here on the screen to show you the results, but there are other labs. There's A&L labs as well. I'm not trying to say one is better than another. This just happened to be what I had on hand. And I think just let me get my pointer going here. So I think on this sheet here, the important thing to look at is when it comes to nitrogen, we're on the high end of low or low end of medium. And when we look at phosphorus and potassium, we're in the high range. So I think that's the takeaway from this sheet. I guess another one is we've run this tunnel for 10 cropping seasons, and our salts are still fairly reasonable. They're edging up, but the salinity isn't ridiculously high yet. So from our samples and the results we got, we're going to have to come up with a blend and figure out how much fertilizer we're going to put on. And you want to use your results and the recommendations for what you're going to want. In our case, we're going to not want to put all our fertilizer up front, like most vegetable producers. We're going to put 60% of the fertilizer up front as broadcast, and the remainder will be put in through the irrigation system weekly with a soluble fertilizer. So the testing we did showed we had 37 pounds of N, about 270 pounds of P, and 946 pounds of potassium. Now, we want to have for our crop 135 pounds of N, 250 pounds of P, and 250 pounds of K. So, what does that mean? Basically, we're going to have to come up with 81 pounds of N. We don't have to put any phosphorus on or any K on. Should mention when I say we don't have to put any phosphorus on, if you're looking to build phosphorus, you might consider putting some phosphorus down. We've been fairly aggressive at building phosphorus, and we're going to, in our high tunnel, put some phosphorus on with when we transplant as a starter solution, and a bit during the summer. So we're going to run just with 81 pounds of N and no P or K. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're doing 60% up front. So basically that means we're looking to put just under 50 pounds of N on as a broadcast up front. Um, and the remainder will be weekly through the growing season with a water soluble fertilizer through the irrigation system, which allows us to spoon feed it if we need more or less. Usually it works out more. We need more. We could up the rate a bit or tighten the window of instead of being every 7 days to apply fertilizer, we could be every five, say, or something along those lines. Um, Now moving from soil preparation, or sorry, from fertilizer preparation to soil preparation. We would put our broadcast fertilizer down, harrow it in, but then we'd have to work the soil. We use both tractor mounted rotavators and walk behind rotavators to prepare the soil in our tunnel. This picture here is, I can't remember the date exactly or the year, but you can certainly see there's snow around. The tractor's picked up some mud on its tires, but that is in getting it into the tunnel. Inside the tunnel, it's plenty dry. The soil very easily is worked with the rotavator. There's no clod. It's not making any clods. It's not wet in the tunnel when we're doing this operation in April kind of thing. After the soil has been prepared, we're going to put down irrigation drip tape and plastic mulch is laid down. So here is just a shot of some plastic mulch with drip tape running through it. Because ours is research plots, we have flags with variety names and codes on them, and that you can ignore that. That's just for our own purposes. But the main thing is we have, just let me get my pointer going here. Where are we here? Laser pointer. So right here, you can see a hole in the mulch and a drip tape running through there, and that will be where transplants go in. Now, I touched a bit on the idea of irrigation. We're going to use the irrigation to apply fertilizer, but we're also going to use the irrigation just to supply water to the crop. And that's the amount of water you're going to need and how often in a day you're going to need it. Depends on the size of the plants, the size of the roots to take up the water. So basically, we choose to use a timer. We had what would be the right word? A golf course type timer was quite expensive. Well, I shouldn't say that. It was relatively expensive, and it worked very well for about 9 years, and then it gave up the ghost. And the cost of replacement, you can only imagine in the 10 years or the 9 years how much it had gone up. So basically, something that was a couple hundred bucks was over 700 bucks. So I chose to use the Canada Tire $60 timer. I don't think it's going to last as long, but it certainly works, and we've had no issues with it. So, from a cost benefit perspective, something you don't always have to go high end, I guess is what I'm saying. So, the timer you can set to, in our case, we have it come on 2 to 3 times a day. early on in the season where the plants are small and the roots are small, could be as little as 10 to 15 minutes. And as the plants get bigger, and it can be as often as 45 minutes to an hour at a time, kind of thing. So, again, totally adjustable, very simple to use. Um, Now, in the way of operation of the tunnel, I get lots of questions regarding cooling. How are how are we going to exhaust heat? Like if you're in a true greenhouse, you'd have temperature activated fans that when the temperature hit a set point, I don't know, 40 Celsius, 38 Celsius, wherever you wanted it to be, the fan would kick on and exhaust the hot air out of the tunnel. Well, in a high tunnel, it has no powered ventilation. That's part of what a high tunnel is. So to get rid of heat, to exhaust it, can only be accomplished via passive ventilation. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we have three different ways we do it. The sides of their tunnel can be rolled up. You can open the doors on the tunnel, or you can open gable vents on the tunnel, or you can do all three. So let's look at our tunnel specifically. So here is a picture of our tunnel with the sides open. Well, both sides are open. This is approximately 3 feet high and it's 100 feet long. So there'd be 300 square feet of ventilation there on the one side. So you double that for two sides. So it's about 600 square feet of area where air can move in and out for the sides. Now, here's the picture of the door. The doors are around 7.5 feet square total area. So that's what, a little over 50 square feet. And two doors, that's a little over 100 square feet of area to allow ventilation. But I just wanted to talk a bit about with the sides. It's from the ground, obviously up 3.5 feet. With the door, it goes up 7.5 feet. And that leads into the whole discussion of, well, with heat rising, how are we going to make sure we're getting rid of damaging heat to the plant if we're using the sides as our major source of ventilation? Well, that's accomplished with in our tunnel with gable vents. So there's two gable vents, one at each end. The square footage isn't huge, but it doesn't really need to be because it's right up at the top of the tunnel, and that's where the warmest air is. So it's quite efficient if those are open at allowing heat to escape. Now, also, we have to think of retention of heat as well. So if we're say we've just planted our transplants in there, it's late April, early May, and all of a sudden we're going to get a -5 or something overnight. Well, if we were in the field, we'd even if you covered them with something, you're probably going to get some damage. In the tunnel, though, we can try to retain heat because you have to remember too, our tunnel, 15.5 feet by 100 feet long in the spring is mostly black, the soil. So it becomes a bit of a heat sink to absorb heat. And then through the evening and night, it will be giving off that heat. So if we want to retain heat, we're going to close the sides, we're going to close the doors, we're going to close the gable vents. And a successful way to monitor heat for us, or sorry, temperature for us, has been with some automatic sensors. And doesn't mean every high tunnel needs to have them. It just is, this high tunnel is located over an hour from where we're based out of. And it just is handy to be able to check it online. Now, this tunnel will provide anywhere we've shown over the 10 years we've run it, anywhere from about -3 to -5 degrees Celsius of frost protection. Now, that's going to depend though on how low the lowest temperature recorded is and how long the length of time is that the frost is there. For example, a frost that goes down to -5 for 30 minutes, and right after that, say it's -2, and the hour after that it's 0, is not nearly going to be as devastating as a frost that goes to -5, lasts for 4 hours, and on the shoulders of that time, the temperature is only increasing by, say, half a degree, and it takes another 6 hours or something to get to a plus temperature. So the factors that influence the amount of frost protection are obviously the lowest temperature, but also the duration of the frost. That's going to make a big difference. Now, we use our sensors, sorry, are updated hourly online. And I just took a screenshot of this. It happens to be in January, so the the temperatures aren't going to be conducive to growing crops. But on the screen, I put the link here to if anyone's ever interested in going to this site to look at the temperatures. If you want the link, you could email me and I can send you the link. Again, producers don't necessarily have to have this. I think it's fairly good investment to have some type of remote sensing. So even if you're not there, you can be checking on it to be making decisions as to what you're going to open or close based on temperatures. Now, I did mention earlier that our high tunnel isn't located at the site where we're based out of. So sometimes we need to make decisions for how much venting we're going to have, say, in a day or overnight, based on the best information we have, the forecasts. But we all know forecasts can change in that. We installed a feature that gives us a little bit of wiggle room on the temperature. So we have a bit of an automatic ventilation feature, and it's not very fancy. It's heat activated piston. You can see, just let me get my pointer going here. So this piston or this rod here has a piston in the top of it, and as the temperature heats up, just ambient temperature, it will heat the metal that is that cylinder here that holds the piston, and the gas in there will start to expand and push the rod up, which then takes this hinged door. It's hinged at the top of the picture there, and it opens it up. And it doesn't open it like wide open to where you have like 4 square feet or sorry, 40 square feet of venting at all four doors, but it does open it enough that air can get in and out. So it is a bit of a fail-safe. It can be the difference between temperatures becoming harmful to your crop and not. So something like this is a pretty good feature to have. And here I'll zoom in. Here we have in our doors, they're not open. This picture happens to be in late fall, but you can see here are the pistons, and they would open the door just like in the previous picture. So yeah, it's a fairly easy system to install, and it's very beneficial. I think it helps. if temperatures aren't what they're forecast to be. Um, okay, let's switch gears into production a little bit. So, just like if you're growing warm season crops in the field, you're going to need to start them in a greenhouse. The biggest difference would be since you're going to plant in the high tunnel, transplant into the high tunnel sooner, you're going to have to start seedlings in a greenhouse sooner. But basically, everything else would be the same. That's just pictures here of some peppers. There are other crops, but the peppers are in the foreground here that are destined for our tunnel. Um, Not all crops going in the tunnel would need to be transplanted. You could seed crops. We've done work with kales, spinaches, lettuces, and they've Swiss chards even, and they've been direct seeded in the tunnel. Now, seedlings that are transplanted into the tunnel may require being trellised depending on the crop. So crops like tomatoes, cucumbers should be trellised to maximize yield potential and maintain quality. Crops such as peppers, for example, wouldn't need to be trellised. We've run into issues with some of our peppers that the plants are so large and there's so many peppers on them that they tend to want to fall over. So we have staked some pepper plants just simply to stop the plants from falling over, but we haven't truly trellised them so they grow upwards. It's just to maintain them as an erect plant in the high tunnel. I just want to zoom in here for a second here and talk about something. So it's a little hard to see, but I want you to look in my right hand here. There is a green tool I'm using here, and what that is, it puts a vinyl tape around the stake and the plant stem to hold it together. So if you look right here at this corner, here's a piece of the tape going around the stake, and on the back of the stake is the stem. We're just going to talk about that a little bit later, and I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up on that. So I think I mentioned this, the crops that require trellising and crops that don't require trellising. We discussed that already. Now, trellising can be accomplished using the wooden stakes. If you remember the picture a couple of slides before, when I was using the vinyl tape tool to attach the cucumber stem to a wooden stake. That's one way of trellising. Another way is with wire or string or plastic baler twine that's tied to the frame of the tunnel, run that down to the ground, and then run the plant up that twine or wire. Now we've tried both these as I mentioned, and they both work. They have advantages, disadvantages, but the wooden stake method is going to be more expensive. So I would lean towards using the plastic baler twine or wire as the most cost-effective method. Now, if we're using the plastic baler twine, you can use clips, plastic clips to attach them. And let me zoom in here. So here is a picture of the clips that we use. They have hinges here that open up and go around the plastic baler twine. Then the jaws you close around the stem and it snaps shut through here. And they work great. The clips are not expensive. It's a really good system. Thing to remember is sometimes you will need to hold part of the plant that it's next to impossible to clip. So using the vinyl tape that comes with the Max Tapener type tool is also advantageous at some points. So I guess I'm saying clips work really well 90% of the time, but you should have some a backup system so that if you can't get around the baler twine and the stem, you can still bring that or sorry, tie that up. Um, now the other, like I was talking about, is this Max Tapener tool, and it has wide jaws in there that will go around the stake and the stem, and it has staples in it where the tape comes in. Here, I'm gonna get my mag pointer a little better. So the stem and the stake run through here, and basically this comes down and creates the staple will then go around the tape so it holds the tape onto the stake and the stem. Now, here's a picture. I'm guessing, I don't know the exact date, but I'm guessing it's in August here. There's been a bit of pruning done. You can see the some of the tomatoes are starting to ripen, and basically, just got to do a little zooming here. Sorry. So now here we have, excuse me, we have stakes in the ground that hold the baler twine that runs upward to the top of the high tunnel where it's attached to the frame. So let's get a wider angle view here. So basically, that baler twine runs on a bit of an angle up to the center, and we clip and tie the plants to that, and it seems to work fine. Remember, I did mention that crops like peppers don't necessarily need to be trellised, but if you notice on the left side of the slide here, you can see some short wooden stakes in these pepper rows. Well, some of these peppers were so large and had so much weight of fruit on them that they were beginning to fall over. So we put stakes in there and did tie the plants to the stakes. Not true trellising, but we did need some form of support, or the plants would have fallen over. Now, when we look at crop production in a high tunnel, it's going to cost you more. You're going to have more intensive management. There's going to be the biggest change is more labor, but there's also going to be more inputs. Like you need to stake, to trellis, to clip, to tie plants. Um, Pruning, not that many producers are going to be pruning, say, field tomatoes, but certainly if you're growing tomatoes in a high tunnel, pruning is very advantageous. Uh, for production in a high tunnel, the we've noticed the percentage of marketable yield. That is, you have a total yield, but how much can you sell? Tomato wise, 50 to 60% marketable yield from a field is probably normal, whereas in a high tunnel, 85 to 95% marketable is common. So you have a higher marketable yield percentage. More of your crop, a higher percentage is marketable. So what does that mean for a producer? Well, you're going to have higher gross incomes, higher net incomes than you would achieve in the field. But there are increased costs. I mean, we talked about the labor, but there's the cost of the tunnel itself. From our data, we've shown it takes anywhere from about 2 to 3 crops to pay off the capital cost of your tunnel. Now, that's a pretty decent return. There aren't many businesses where you could look at paying your capital cost off within that length of time. Most people would amortize capital costs for 10 or 20 years. Um, so yes, there are benefits to a tunnel, but there are also increased risks. If you wind up with a pest problem, it can magnify quickly because you're indoors. So it's not a solution where you can just plant and walk away and come back and harvest. It requires daily monitoring. Um, Generally for us, harvest begins earlier, and that's going to be, we've noticed our cucumbers anywhere from late May to early June is when we start harvesting. Tomatoes early to mid-July, and peppers early to mid-August is when we begin harvesting. Now, you're also going to be able to extend harvest later into the season because the plants will survive longer. I just threw up a picture. This is from last year showing some mini cucumbers that we harvested May 30th in the tunnel. I just wanted to show here that though tunnels are a great benefit to increasing yields and quality, it's not a perfect system. So here, let me get my pointer going a little clearer. So at the top here, we have a mini cuke that would be marketable on, say, a superstore shelf in that cello tray of mini cukes that you see. Whereas this one down below here with this curve in it, it's not going to make the grade. It would certainly be, there's nothing wrong with it to eat. I mean, you could sell that at a farmer's market all day long. But if you were selling this to a store to put on their shelves, the top cucumber here is marketable. The bottom one would not be marketable. But again, it would be marketable through farmers market, a CSA, through other avenues, but it wouldn't be as a large retail setting. Um, so I've touched on it a bit, but harvesting can go on much longer in the tunnel because you're going to have a longer frost-free period. The crop will continue to produce. And our latest harvest that had marketable fruit in it was on December 5th. Now, the caution here is that's only 1 year. I mean, some years we've been done in middle of October. I mean, frozen out, even early October 1 year. But it's always been the high tunnel has a longer growing season than what's being grown outside. Now, we can say in general, marketable yields of vegetables are greater when they're from a high tunnel than when you grow them in the field. Also, the quality of produce from in a tunnel is generally superior, and certainly the marketable yield percentage is significantly higher. And I mean statistically significant, not just a bit higher, but it is higher. So to summarize this discussion on vegetables, high tunnels are more intensive vegetable production system than in the field. You get higher yields than you would in a field setting. High tunnels extend the growing season. You get to start earlier and you get to finish later. High tunnels add costs, both capital costs in the sense of the tunnel and associated expenses, and variable costs in the sense of labor, things like that. But they are going to increase your farm incomes, both net or both gross and net incomes. Okay, at this point, we're going to switch to a bit of a discussion on fruit. And for that presentation, I'm going to introduce Anthony Mintenko. Anthony is the provincial fruit crop specialist with Manitoba Agriculture. He provides expert production advice on all commercially grown fruit crops across Manitoba. Anthony works closely with the Prairie Fruit Growers Association and Assiniboine College's horticulture program on fruit crops research, extension field days, and seminars. Anthony has received the Provincial Service Excellence Team Award and 20-year-long service award and participated in the 8th Annual International Strawberry Symposium and numerous North American Strawberry Grower Association berry tours. Anthony lives on an acreage with his family, enjoys gardening and cycling. So, Anthony, here we go. Take it away.
Thanks, Tom. And again, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat feature and we'll feature them at the end of the presentation. Um, yeah, so I'm just going to give a brief overview of high tunnel crop production with fruit crops. There aren't in Manitoba a lot of different options that you would do. Essentially, it's what you're looking at is strawberries or raspberries for either early season or late season production. And as Tom mentioned previously, in the tunnel, you do have definitely higher quality, less disease issues. Um, but to kind of justify the infrastructure cost and increased management costs, you want to have a high value crop, which is why it's kind of gone to strawberries and raspberries. Slide. Okay, so we'll start with high tunnel raspberries. So what I don't know what we've tried and what has been successful in other regions is doing fall bearing um, raspberries. So those are the ones that you typically would have in August into September up to freeze up production. So late season production, either grown in ground or in container plantings. And if you did grow them in container plantings, you would move them in the fall once they're dormant to kind of a warmer or a location that's not going to get as subjected to the cold winter Manitoba temperatures. So not necessarily a heated shed or anything, but just maybe a shed that's not going to get to, you know, below -20 type of thing. You'll need to trellis them. They do grow quite a bit uh, in height and arching width. Um, However, you can use less hardy plants, less like let's say zone 4, 5, maybe even 6 plants because you are going to store them for the winter. And so what you would select for are varieties that do better in the high tunnel. So essentially, um, and this also depends on your what your market is. Actually, you can move to the next slide, Tom. Um, if your market is, let's say, retail, like grocery, or even restaurants, you want to select the varieties of raspberries that are a lighter color. Under in a restaurant or in a grocery setting, the lighting in those in the stores, anything that's darker, a darker color for a berry is going to look overripe. So Driscoll, which is the big multinational raspberry company that you'll see a lot of commercial raspberries sold in stores, they only use lighter colored berries. So that doesn't look like that's overripe. And it's actually quite dramatic how you could just have them out in the sun, they look fine. You take them into more under that fluorescent lights, they look overripe, and people just don't buy them because they think they're they're too ripe. Next, please. I just when was it? Oh, just one more thing about the raspberries. In a lot of the studies, economic studies, cost of production studies, have found that raspberries are the more profitable of the two, raspberries and strawberries. And that's primarily because you definitely probably get double the price for raspberries compared to strawberries, even charging a premium price. So that's why typically when you look at any kind of cost of production on in high tunnel for berries, raspberries usually want to come out on top. Um, for strawberries, typically uh, growers would use day neutrals, which means it's more for a late harvest as opposed to early harvest. However, we are testing with June bearing for an early harvest and had some success. So, if you subscribe to our fruit crop report, Manitoba Ag fruit crop report, just Google that. We will be giving, we did last year and we will get in this year updates on how that trial is going. And as I said, it could be either in ground or tabletop plantings. Here you see A-frames that we're using. I have grown them in the ground, but I don't think the production yield is high enough. And you're also not utilizing the space efficiently in a high tunnel. So I think to be profitable, you need to go to an A-frame type setting and even more intense plantings than what's shown here. Uh, Next slide. So this is true for the raspberries as well and the strawberries. They your market you need a premium price. You're not going to have the same yields as field planting. It's, you do have less, I would say, pesticide. Definitely, there's no herbicide sprays. And most years you would not have a fungicide spray as well. So you do have lower costs there on an input side. However, the infrastructure costs, of course, are higher and your yields are not as high as in the field. So it's a bit of a wash there. But these are premium um, products and you need to price them accordingly. So uh, if you're aiming for early season or late season markets, you want to really what you do in your first in the market. So you need to price that accordingly. So a lot of this would be pre-pick sales and have to be a premium price to justify the lower yields and your infrastructure costs. Next slide, please. So overall, it's yeah. Next slide, Tom. Overall, what you're looking at is trying to get the either the early like you're trying to get the premium price for either early or late season bef bef when field crops are really not available. So you're trying to get that premium price. You're trying to maximize your yields. Um, so what we presumed for right now, I have if I did a whole high tunnel, 100 feet of strawberries, um, using the A-frames I had there at that size, that's equal to about 3,600 plants. So it's about half an acre planting. Let's say you get $30 a basket, 4 liter basket. And you get about 85 baskets. That's only $2,500. So we think to be more profitable and just to pay off the infrastructure costs, we'd want to double that, probably to as opposed to 10 troughs per 10 feet, 20 troughs per 10 feet. So make the A-frames more vertical and fit instead of just one A-frame across is in the tunnel we have there is two A-frames. And so then you're looking at close to, 7,000 plants because you're putting about 40 plants per trough. So then when you're looking at that's about 170 basket 4 liter baskets at $30 a basket, a pre-pick. So it's more $5,100 gross. That's getting into a more profitable area. And just for a comparison, and 1 acre planting of field strawberries, 1,700 plants, you're looking at, it's even at a low yield, or let's say 2,500 pounds per acre. That's, over 600 4-liter baskets. Let's say you just do U-pick, so it's $20 a basket. That's your gross would be 12,500. So it's something you need to keep in mind compared to your way higher yields in the field. You're trading off input costs in either system, but regardless, because of your lower yields and your infrastructure costs, you definitely need to charge more of a premium price for the high tunnel strawberries. And okay, so what's listed on this slide here is some of the um, extension material that would be applicable to Manitoba in a sense, and not surprisingly, it's from the University of Minnesota Extension Service. So they do have one on raspberry production, high tunnels, and day neutral strawberry production in field and tabletop. Also low tunnels, which is that a top corner there is what they're calling a low tunnel. Um, and a lot of those varieties that they're using in the high tunnel, they've tested that it work best in the high tunnel. So definitely you're using different cultivars in the high tunnel compared to field. Typically you want is again lighter colored, firmer berries because you're doing more pre-pick sales or pretty much primary pre-pick sales. So I think that's my last slide, Tom.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble advancing
It's okay.
the slide. But yes, it is the last one. The next slide is questions.
Okay.
So
Well,
yeah, thank
we do have questions. So
yeah, thanks, Anthony. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. There's a few in there now. We'll get to them. First one I see is for you, Anthony. Are spotted wing Drosophila a problem in raspberry or strawberry crops in the high tunnel?
they have not been, especially for early season production. The spotted wing populations aren't that high yet, and so we're talking like May, June. Uh, the numbers just aren't there. Um, Even for the raspberries, hasn't been as big of an issue, primarily because it's so typically hotter and drier in the tunnel. It's not a favorable environment for spotted wing. It's not to say we haven't had spotted wing in raspberries, but typically even so we're for the raspberries, we're aiming more for late season production. The spotted wing population levels have typically started to crash by then. Not to say that's not something you should look out for, but in our, you know, 5 years of high tunnel research, spotted wing has not been a problem in Manitoba. I know it is a problem in high tunnel operations south of the border in warmer climates, but we haven't hasn't been an issue here. But it's definitely something you need to monitor still. Good.
Okay, thank you.
Uh,
Um,
so do you want me to go through the questions? Because most of them are
sure.
we could
Yeah.
just take. So we have one. Where are you getting your clips? Type brand.
Okay. Well, we are getting our clips from locally from Even Spray, I believe. They are available online. I mean, I'm sure they're made offshore and they're not very cheap. I could not tell you the specific brand. If you were to Google uh, tomato clip for sale, I'm sure you would find a number of places that would sell it. And depending on how quickly you needed it and how much you're willing to pay, you could get it locally or online. Hopefully that answers that.
Good. And another one uh, on yields. Do you have any numbers about yields from your experience? So I know I touched that a bit already on the strawberries, but if you want to
Right.
maybe say that on the
Yeah.
raspberries.
And I see that that's from Bruce. And yeah. Okay, so I think what we can say is over the years that we've had vegetable crops in there, we have had, say for tomatoes, we've had some tomato varieties produce as low as 20 pounds per plant. We've had some produce in the 50 plus pounds per plant range. It's very hard to, unless we talk specific varieties and that, to generally talk yields. But I would say overall, our tomatoes are going to be averaging somewhere in the 45-ish pound per plant window. And depending on where you're selling your crop, be it say a farmer's market or if you're selling it to a retailer, your price is going to be different, and you can work out your differences in or with the different price, you can work out what you might be potentially able to get in a return. I think another thing that's important is the amount of labor. If you have like a mini tomato versus a beefsteak tomato, it's going to be significantly more labor to pick a clamshell full of mini tomatoes than to pick 5 pounds of slicers, just because it's going to take more hand movement to do it. So for tomatoes, yeah, let's say about 45-ish pounds. Peppers, more variability in peppers. I'd have to really crunch some numbers to publicly put a number out there. So let's just stick with tomatoes for now. Hopefully if it doesn't answer your question, Bruce, you can call me or email me and
Well, one thing I would add in is that compared to field, for peppers at least, the quality is night and
oh
day for high
yeah,
tunnel. They're
like
ready sooner. They're just it's when it compared to field, a lot like your unmarketable yield in the field is a lot higher than in the high tunnel.
yeah, and I went over, I had slides with that. Hopefully I articulated that correctly, that the marketable yield of crops inside the vegetable crops inside the high tunnel is not just higher, but it is statistically significantly higher. Without a doubt, that can be said. So not only are you generating a higher total yield, but your percent that you're able to sell is higher. The uniformity, the lack of deformities on the crop is greater. And it's very, uh, I don't know the best word to describe it. You're definitely having more to sell, and again, depending on where you're selling them to. Take peppers if you're selling it at a farmer's market. I think last year when I was looking at it, some are selling for like $8 a pound even. I don't know if that's standard everywhere, but I certainly saw some selling for $8 a pound. Well, you know, if you're looking at $8 a pound, I mean, and we'd have to extrapolate some numbers, but say you had a high tunnel full of peppers and you were able to sell them for $8 a pound, well, you've got over 10 grand worth of income kind of thing,
Yeah.
you know? Maybe I should just touch on income a bit. Like when we've extrapolated yields from our plots to say having our whole tunnel, which is 100 feet by 15 and a half feet, we've got gross incomes that have been down as low as 6,000 up to 12, $13,000. for a full tunnel. And when we built the tunnel, our capital cost was 6 grand with all the extras. I think 6,600 somewhere in there, but certainly under 7,000. I think it was just over 6,000. So it's going to be pretty economical production, I guess, even though you're going to have higher input costs. Um, Hope that answers that.
Okay, good. Um, Also, okay, so have people used double poly to get better heat retention?
Okay, short answer to that is I am aware. I haven't seen it, but I have heard that there are, or sorry, is one tunnel in Manitoba that has a double layer of poly. We are needing to replace our poly. We are going to stick with a single layer of poly. I do understand the logic behind having 2 layers of poly. It would be worthwhile, in my opinion, to test, to test how well 2 layers of poly work versus cost. You're basically going to double your plastic cost. For example, for those of you who were at last week's webinar, our fitting that we use to hold the poly on, that two-piece plastic fitting, they make one that's just a slightly different size that's made to hold 2 layers of poly at once. And if you're doing wiggle wire, you could use that to hold 2 layers. So it is possible. I just have not seen it personally. Anecdotally, it seems to retain more heat, but how do we define more? I think we'd have to test it to evaluate whether it's efficacious or not to spend the extra money.
Okay. Another question. Have you looked into slash tried following the warm season crop with cool season transplants?
Okay. Short answer is no to that. A more involved question is, or comment to the question. The implication here is, say, like when we're done harvesting tomatoes, we put in transplant of some cooler season crop and continue using the tunnel. In our experience, we continue to harvest right up until freeze up. Now, an argument can be made that the rate of harvest, your return, is nowhere near as high, say, in November as it is for tomatoes, I'm talking, in November as it is in August and September. So we would need to, or not need to, sorry, we would consider terminating, say, a tomato crop in middle, late September when the yields start to go down and put in a cool season crop and see how that would go. But we would need to do that research to see how it goes. At this point, I could not say yes, it would be economical or not, but it certainly is something to consider looking at.
Cool. Can you go back one or two slides? Because I have a in your
Okay.
A frame are those eaves troughs? Yes, they are eaves troughs. So um one I tried two different types. One's like uh plastic or poly type eaves trough, which is what you're seeing there. And the other ones I always try just like metal ones that you would and they're both I just bought them at the hardware store. For the metal ones, you could see well, I guess those are all the metal ones. I had to put a board on the backside of the metal ones because it just there wasn't the strength there. I was worried about it buckling in the middle. With the plastic ones, and that wasn't an issue. They were strong enough all the way across. But so I just it's just like a 1x4 board. that I just screwed to the backside. Um, and so yeah, I've had these for 3 seasons, and they're durable. They seem to work. Uh, what I would do if let's say I was doing a full tunnel is that to reduce the cost even more is just to contact a eavesdropper because they just spin it off a reel to make this eavesdrop. So let's just say contact an eavesdropper, say what's the color that you're stuck with? Magenta eavesdrop. Can you give me a deal on that? I'll take whatever, a couple 100 feet of it. I think that would be a lot cheaper than trying to buy through a like hardware store. Um, Hope that answers. Okay. Any ideas why the yields are lower in the high tunnel for strawberries? Well, compared to field, so our field strawberries was in Manitoba are a matted row production on, and so that's where you let the runners root down. So let's say you're planting 7,000 plants in a field. When you add in all the runners that you're rooting as well, that doubles, triples it. So you're looking at you have 20 to 30,000 plants in the field as opposed to just like per acre per 7,000. So your yield is a lot higher. And also, if we just grew, so you couldn't do that kind of system on the you could do that kind of system in the high tunnel, but then you'd have to grow just on the ground, and then you're really the amount of square feet in actual production is quite low compared to you know having growing them on A-frames, which kind of gets your yields a little higher. Uh, so yeah, the benefits with strawberries in the high tunnel definitely is quality. We found their shelf life was 2 weeks in a fridge because they're not getting rained on, so there's no fruit rot happening. Um, and you're early into the market, so charge a premium price, which is what the stores are. I mean, really, if you match the store price, you're probably at a profitable level.
Hmm.
Um, okay, rotating crops usually set as a highly important control for controlling disease. How does that principle play out in high tunnels with a limited footprint?
Okay, so from the vegetable perspective here, what we have done, not it's not ideal, but what we have done is move our crops location within the tunnel. Um, take in last year going from east to west, we had peppers, a row of peppers, row of tomatoes, row of cucumbers, row of peppers. And the year before would have been peppers in this. Let me think here. Nothing on the outside rows, and the two middle rows were peppers. The year before that, we flipped where the cucumber and tomato were. So we're doing the best we can to rotate, but it's not ideal because it's you're not moving it more than 4, 5, 10 feet at the max away from where the crop was before. So the one way to deal with rotating is in a number of years, say when you're replacing the poly on your tunnel or something, you can physically roll the tunnel 20 feet to the left or right or north or south or however it's oriented, put it on some fresh ground and do it that way. But within the tunnel, you can rotate, but it's not going to be nearly as advantageous in the sense of reducing disease problems. Hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, I'll just answer. I have one here. Okay, so yeah, the strawberries we are watered using drip tape, so we're not initially. when we first plant them, we might be just using sprinkler or like hand water, but typically we try to set up the drip tape as quick as possible. Um, yeah, and a question on was yield. They're kind of
Yes.
what's available in terms of published data.
Yeah, I see that. At this point, we would have numbers, and they're not published in the sense of in a scientific journal or anything, but we would have numbers available. There's a a wider data set available out of Minnesota would be on their website. We're planning to put our data on the website in the future. And yeah, like I say, I think it's safe to say tomato wise, average a little under 50 pounds a plant. And then you could do the math to decide how many plants you'd have in a tunnel, but we're running space in row spacings of as low as 2 feet or as wide as 2.5 feet, and row spacings as narrow as 3 feet and as wide as 4.5 feet. We put two rows closer together on one side because you're only going to be picking from one side and reaching through the crop to do your picking. So it's a staggered row spacing. So you could do some quick math, come up with a number of plants you'd have in your tunnel, what your selling price is, and use a yield, attainable yield, and see what you could get. And
Good.
Bruce, if that doesn't, if you want more, just call me or email me. We can talk.
So, and this is an issue with it come up in high tunnels
Yeah.
and this question is how do you control salt buildup in the soil?
Okay, so that's a
That
multi,
is an issue.
yeah, it's a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach that one would need to take. So there's a couple of options there. Just like in the field, you could try to flush salts downward if you have a salinity problem. Just stepping back for a sec, probably one of the best solutions would be to use a relatively low salt water source. In our case, we're using, of all things, City of Portage water. So it's potable water that we're using, and I'm fairly certain that the salinity levels are, though not excessive, they're certainly not low, kind of thing. Um, we have gone, this is the 10th year we've been growing in the tunnel, and we've know salinity has been climbing, but it's not at a level. We haven't got soil test results for this year yet, but as late as last year's soil test results, they're not at a level that would be harmful to vegetable crops, but they are climbing. Now, I think I touched on it a little earlier in one of the questions, but what you can do is simply move the tunnel to a slightly different spot. I'm not saying pack it up and haul it a mile down the road, but if we were to move our tunnel, our plan would be to, with something with forklift tines, lift up the edge of the tunnel, insert uh, round fence posts or something it could roll on, and basically roll it one direction to the side, like not the length of it, but so maybe 20 feet. So you'd have to move it 20 feet or something. Um, we haven't done that yet, but if we were to get to a point where we needed to move, that would be one option is just move the tunnel. But like I say, you could mitigate salts through sort of standard methods where you just run the irrigation, as long as your irrigation source wasn't high salinity, and flush those salts downward. Obviously, if you had a really high water table, it's not going to be as effective as if your water table's lower.
Okay,
So those would
last
be.
question. Have you compared production between low tunnel, mid tunnel, and high tunnel for fruit crops? We have not, but definitely in Minnesota they have. I don't know if they have data comparing yields between the three. For fruit crops, I think the only advantage for using a low tunnel would be in shorter growing regions. So maybe if you want to try to grow strawberries farther north and to get over that risk of frost, or just for early season production, just to maximize uh, heat retention. What about for veggies?
I pretty much concur with what you said and the reasoning behind it. Like the short answer is no. We haven't compared low tunnel versus high tunnel. Uh, More involved answer there would be the low tunnel would be more just to be able to start not start, sorry, to have vegetable crops in the field earlier and be able to take them a little bit later. But in general, they're still going to be exposed to the elements and outside of a tunnel. The low tunnel is to more get away from low temperatures. So we have no data on that, but in Minnesota, Anthony said there's stuff for fruit crops, and I do seem to remember a couple of studies related to low tunnels. One of them may have been using a low tunnel within a high tunnel to get even more frost protection, though, as opposed to just a low tunnel out in a field on its own. But there would be studies out of Minnesota that would, if I'm correct, would do compare low tunnel to high tunnel.
Well, and the only from a commercial application, the only places I've seen where this has been used for like a market garden setup is like in the Yukon, is
Right.
where I've seen it, where they're and it's for all vegetable crops, is
Yeah.
just to protect them because the season A is short
Yeah.
and their risk of frost goes well into a lot later than here.
Yeah.
So that way they can still get decent production without
Yeah.
without with them able to still grow a wider variety of vegetable crops.
For sure.
Um, yeah. So anyways, I think we'll end it there. So this concludes today's webinar. On behalf of the Horticulture School Organizing Committee, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar. And just a reminder, next week's webinar is entitled Identification and Management of Vegetable Crop Diseases. And if you'd like information on how to register, please contact Tom. And his email is tom.gonsalves at gov.mb.ca. So again, thank you for your attendance and look forward to maybe seeing everyone next week as well. So goodbye.
Thank you.